Nothing beats a good old heel turn in pro wrestling. Turning to the dark side seems to get more people talking than a guy turning babyface, and that's because heel turns are supposed to come across as a bit more shocking and a bit more unexpected. Sometimes it doesn't work, but a well executed heel turn has the chance to live on forever as an unforgettable moment. Today I'm going to take a look at a few of my favourite heel turns. Some will be obvious, of course, because it would be a sin to leave off some of the more well-known turns, but I'll also explain why the turn went well and why I personally enjoyed them. So here's some of my favourite heel turns in pro wrestling. This one falls into the obvious category, and it's one that's been talked about frequently, but that's for good reason. The Rockers tag team was a hit with younger fans and also female fans. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty incorporated a lot of tandem high-flying offense into their moveset that excited fans. They had a carefree attitude that people gravitated towards, and just their overall presentation, from their entrance music to their ring attires, told viewers that, hey, these guys like to have fun, and you're gonna have fun watching them wrestle. All good things must come to an end though, and after some issues behind the scenes, and because Shawn had his own desire to begin a singles run, the Rockers would break up in an infamous promo held in Brutus Beefcake's barber shop. In the run-up to this historic moment, the tag team were having some issues in the ring, and the WWF magazine even covered the potential breakup of Shawn and Marty Jannetty. Marty said if Shawn wants to make this work, he has to shake his hand and put their problems aside. Shawn not only shook Marty's hand, but he gave him a big old hug, and the fans popped. Just when everyone thought the Rockers were back on track, Shawn kicked Marty in the face and he proceeded to put Marty's head through the barbershop window. Shawn kicks his former partner while he's down, he grabs the WWF magazine and he rips it in half. Shawn had turned to the dark side and he'd go on to become the Heartbreak Kid. The rest is history. Leaving the Rockers was the best thing Shawn ever did in hindsight, and as for Marty Jannetty, well, yeah, it wasn't so good for Marty.
I don't owe you no explanation. I don't owe you people a damn thing.
Stone Cold said that this didn't work out too well, and many fans online agree with Austin, but I didn't think Austin's time as a heel after WrestleMania 17 was all that bad. I thought some of Austin's promos were great when he went back to the dark side following his match against The Rock, but I also understand why others wouldn't have liked it. Some would actually consider this as one of the worst heel turns in pro wrestling. Austin vs. Rock took place at WrestleMania, and Vince McMahon made an appearance towards the end of the bout. Fans were left shocked when McMahon and Austin joined forces to ensure Stone Cold left WrestleMania as WWF champion. This one was made all the more noteworthy due to the history Vince and Austin had. It was through their rivalry that the Mr. McMahon character became truly prominent on weekly WWF television, and seeing Stone Cold partner up with his boss like this felt a bit strange, but man, what a way to end WrestleMania. Think about it, this heel turn closed what many consider to be the greatest WrestleMania of all time. The vast majority of fans weren't ready to boo Stone Cold though. It was always going to be a tough sell, seeing as fans had cheered a heel Austin back in late 96 and 97, and it was those cheers that turned him naturally into a babyface. The WWF would have to edit pre-tape shows and add boos because fans were still giving Stone Cold positive reactions when he walked to the ring. But again, I found the heel turn interesting and entertaining, and I enjoy heel Steve Austin just as much as babyface Steve Austin.
Hogan has betrayed WCW. He is the third man.
Another painfully obvious one here, but one I can't leave out of this video. You know the deal, one of the biggest babyfaces of all time. Eat your vitamins, say your prayers. Hulk Hogan rose to the very top of the wrestling world by being a good guy, but all that happened in WWF. In WCW, depending on where the shows were being held, Hulk Hogan could get some pretty rough receptions, not only because he was an old WWF guy, but because he was doing the same old thing that he had done for years and years. Hulkamania wasn't totally broken in the summer of 1996, but it sure would have ended up that way if things continued the way they did. So Hogan took the opportunity to join forces with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and, well, to say there was shock would be an understatement. Hulk did toy around with the dark side the year prior, and it was comically bad, but Nash and Hall were the key to this heel turn being successful. The Outsiders' invasion felt a lot more real than what Hogan had tried to do before. They gave this group an edge and a lot more legitimacy. So everything just fell into place perfectly at Bash at the Beach 1996, and we ended up getting a true game-changing faction that's became just as legendary as WCW itself, the New World Order. Hulk Hogan's heel turn's probably the most significant and noteworthy heel turn in pro wrestling history.
Fans right here across the United States of America, I apologize for nothing.
Bret Hart's heel turn had been building up ever since around December 1996, I'd say. Shawn Michaels still had his fans, and Bret was tearing Shawn a new one frequently on TV, and in a way, it made Bret come off as a little bitter, just a little. Steve Austin was also rising up the ranks as a popular anti-hero, and Austin was getting the better of Bret on a few occasions. While Bret was eager to fight Austin and prove that the Hitman was better than Stone Cold, he would also complain quite a lot whenever he got his hands on a microphone, leading to some fans seeing Bret as a crybaby. Still though, what you have to remember here and what makes Bret's heel turn so good is the fact that Bret had a point and Bret was pretty much right. He was getting screwed over by Austin, and it did seem like Shawn was dodging Bret when it came to a fight. Bret was the victim of a lot of injustice, but Stone Cold's popularity just couldn't be denied, and Bret would have to come to terms with a lot of his old fans dismissing the excellence of execution as their hero. It all came to a head at WrestleMania 13, where both Bret and Austin's roles were solidified in what many consider to be the greatest double turn of all time. But do keep in mind that both guys were already well on this path in the run-up to WrestleMania. The WWF did gamble a little on how fans would react, but it turned out better than expected. Austin wouldn't submit to the sharpshooter, and referee Ken Shamrock had to step in and end the WrestleMania 13 submission match. Bret, however, decided to attack Stone Cold after the bell, and when Shamrock took Bret down by force, the Hitman backed down, getting a lot of boos in the process. Austin, meanwhile, showed true grit when he wouldn't submit to Bret's finisher, instead losing consciousness while locked in the sharpshooter, but still never giving up. Stone Cold also refused help when getting out of the ring, preferring to walk back up the ramp by himself and getting a standing ovation in the process. Bret would explain his actions the next night on Raw, and again Bret told no lies and everything he said was true. He talked about all the times he'd been messed around in WWF since returning at the 1996 Survivor Series, and the Hitman kept it all off by saying, "It seems like a lot of fans in America don't care about him anymore, but the fact of the matter is, Bret really doesn't care too much about the American fans neither."
You need to feel my pain!
It's a bit of an interesting one here, and I think it's an example of WWE turning a negative into a positive. When the decision was made to remove Kane's mask, WWE had a bit of a problem. They had told fans for the longest time that Kane's face was disfigured. You've got two options here really. If the mask was definitely going to come off, you could apply makeup every single time Kane performed, including house shows, and that would have been extremely difficult to do. Or you could just do nothing and let Kane go out there with a face that wasn't disfigured and try to explain your way out of it. The WWE went with the latter option, and they decided a heel turn would also be necessary. So when Kane was forced to remove his mask on Raw, a storyline was built around Kane's mental state that was actually pretty well done, all things considered. Kane was mentally disfigured. He had hidden behind the mask out of fear that people wouldn't accept him, and in doing this, he had somehow convinced himself that his face was a mess. When it was pointed out to Kane that there was nothing wrong with how he looks, he would think that people were downplaying the severity of his illness, and this is how WWE would once again solidify Kane as a heel. Jim Ross tried to show Kane empathy, but Kane was having none of it. He would end up setting good old JR on fire when Ross questioned his perceived disfigurement, and Kane would go on a rampage soon afterwards where he was reborn as a monster in WWE, something he hadn't been for quite a few years. Personally speaking, I prefer the old original Kane, but the removal of Kane's mask I thought was handled very well, and reverting Kane back to being an intimidating and unstoppable force in WWE was a good call. It gave the character many more years in the company.
There's always a plan B.
I'm not sure if it was just me that thought this, but when The Shield was getting heavily featured in WWE, I sometimes felt that Seth Rollins didn't get as much recognition as Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose. Roman was always given a little more than the other guys, being a big powerhouse that the WWE took a liking to, and Ambrose managed to get himself highlighted due to how unpredictable and unstable he could be from time to time in the ring. Seth Rollins was given the name the Architect, the guy who puts it all together away from the ring, the planner of the group, the guy who gives the Shield their tactical edge, the man who comes up with the blueprints. So you've got the powerhouse, the chaotic brawler, and the high-flying technician. In my opinion, Seth was the most naturally talented in-ring competitor of the trio, yet it felt to me that more people would talk about his Shield teammates, and hey, I could be totally wrong here, but that's how I remember it. Still though, the trio would become very popular in WWE, but it was Seth who would destroy the Shield when he famously became Triple H's Plan B. Seth hit Roman with a steel chair and Ambrose couldn't believe what he was seeing, so Dean got taken out too, and Seth would join Triple H in the Authority while also becoming one of the biggest heels WWE had to offer. It's a heel turn that would get replayed often, and no one saw it coming. It turned out to be highly beneficial to Seth in terms of his position in the company, but in saying that, every member of the Shield would prosper in one way or another. A good heel turn though, and it created a singles main eventer in just one night.
The Rock never sold out. The Rock just got ahead.
The Rock's 1998 heel turn at Survivor Series was so good because it really was so unexpected. Rock was on the path to becoming one of WWF's top babyfaces alongside Steve Austin, and everything pointed to Rocky becoming a big-time fan favourite at the end of the year. Survivor Series 1998 featured the Deadly Game tournament. The winner of the tournament would become the new WWF champion, and in the finals, Rock would become champion for the first time in his career, but he also got a little assistance from Vince McMahon. A reenactment of the Montreal Screwjob took place, and Vince ordered the timekeeper to ring the bell when Rock put Mankind in the sharpshooter. Keep in mind that Mankind thought he was in Vince's good books when all this went down. Fans had wanted to cheer for Rocky, but all that was taken away when the People's Champion became the Corporate Champion. I feel this is an interesting one because it bucked tradition. You knew The Rock was going to become a huge babyface star because fans couldn't get enough of him during this time period. But the WWF pulled off a great swerve at Survivor Series 1998, and the heel turn ended up being a lot of fun because, well, they got us good. All this would set up a WrestleMania match featuring Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, beginning a WrestleMania trilogy that will go down in history as one of the WWE's best.
Because I didn't get a chance to win the tag belts because of you, but I can count on myself.
It's remembered for Owen's little verbal slip-up at the end, unfortunately, but Owen turning his back on Bret at the 1994 Royal Rumble will always be memorable to me because, as a kid, I remember feeling really bad for Bret. The Hart brothers had a few issues when little brother Owen got eliminated in a Survivor Series match that featured the Hart family taking on Shawn Michaels and the Knights, originally supposed to be Jerry Lawler and the Knights. Over the holiday season, it was revealed that the Harts had put their differences aside and Owen was back on track. The Hitman and his little bro were going to try to win the tag team championships at the 1994 Royal Rumble when they took on the Quebecers. Bret hurt his knee during the match and he tried to persevere. He was unable to apply his sharpshooter though and he couldn't stand up. The referee decided to stop the match and award the victory to Jacques and Pierre. Owen yelled at Bret for not tagging out and then Owen attacked his older brother. It was so well put together too because Owen cut a promo on Bret that was aired on the big screens as the Hitman was being helped to the back. Owen was rubbing salt in the wounds by berating his brother while he clearly needed medical attention. But then Owen has his little slip up when he says he kicked Bret's leg out of his leg, and that line kinda overshadows the whole heel turn now. Still, this is one that resonated with me when I was younger, and it's pretty fun to go back and watch now. Owen and Bret would collide at WrestleMania 10, and Owen was able to beat his big brother on the WWF's biggest stage.
He's sick and tired of you and what you stand for.
A lot of hearts were broken when Andre the Giant showed up to Piper's Pit on the 7th of February 1987 with Bobby Heenan. In order to build up their legendary WrestleMania 3 match, Hogan and Andre were guests on Piper's talk show segment, and if you put yourself back in that time period, and if you remember the influence Hogan had as a babyface, then you might be able to appreciate the emotion of this heel turn. Hulk Hogan was already on set, and when Andre walked out with Heenan, the Hulkster was in complete disbelief. Putting Bobby Heenan with Andre though was a stroke of genius because Heenan was the mouthpiece of the WWF at the time, so the brain speaking on behalf of Andre made this a whole lot more impactful. A few weeks earlier, Hogan was presented with a trophy to commemorate 3 years since the Hulkster won the WWF Championship. Andre made an appearance during Hogan's speech. He said 3 years is a long time to be champion, and he gave Hulk a very firm handshake that threw Hogan off a little. Back in the primetime studio, Bobby Heenan wanted to know where Andre's trophy was, and Gorilla Monsoon said Andre's had plenty of accolades throughout his career. So the following week, WWF gave Andre a trophy, a smaller trophy as pointed out by Bobby Heenan, but Hulk Hogan would come out and Hogan more or less steals Andre's spotlight, not intentionally mind you. Hogan wouldn't stop talking about how great it was that WWF gave Andre a trophy, but the big man didn't want to hear it and Andre walked away. The following week, both trophies were brought to Piper's Pit and Jesse Ventura pointed out the size difference in the trophies, while saying that Hulk Hogan's went out of his way to dodge certain challengers like Andre the Giant. So Ventura says that he's gonna bring Andre to Piper's Pit the following week, while Piper says that he'll get Hogan. Andre walks out the next week with Heenan. Hogan's in pure shock and he pours his red and yellow heart out to Andre. Hogan can't believe the Giant would side with Bobby Heenan, a man who's caused nothing but problems for Hulk and all the Hulkamaniacs. Andre was the reason Hogan wanted to become a wrestler. He's Hogan's role model, and to see him with Bobby Heenan is tearing Hogan apart. Heenan says that Hogan used Andre throughout his career. All Andre got was a small trophy, and even then Hogan got jealous, so he had to run out and steal Andre's spotlight. Not once did Hulk Hogan ever give Andre a title shot, and Andre's gonna challenge Hogan to a WrestleMania match right here on Piper's Pit. Hogan says he and Andre are friends. Andre tells Hogan to get his hands off his shoulders, and then Andre makes the challenge official before ripping the shirt off Hogan's back and ripping the cross off that Hogan wears around his neck. Hogan bleeds here. It was totally unintentional, but it added a lot to the promo, and it's Roddy Piper who has to console Hulk and get him back on his feet. A memorable heel turn and one that worked very, very well. Hunter's turned heel a few times in his career, but the one that pissed me off the most was when he turned on Shawn Michaels in 2002. Being a big fan of 1997 WWF, I was very excited when D-Generation X were set to make their return in the summer of 2002. Triple H had made a triumphant return to WWE at the beginning of the year, while Shawn Michaels returned as part of the NWO. When the NWO angle fell apart, Triple H and Shawn Michaels decided to realign with each other. On the July 22nd, 2002 episode of Raw, HBK was down and out after Eric Bischoff told him he had to be Triple H's manager or he can leave WWE. Shawn said he was gonna leave, Triple H had to talk him out of it, and a little later on, Triple H gave Shawn a shirt to wear because the two were gonna go down to the ring and cut a promo. The DX theme music plays in the arena, the crowd goes crazy, and the Game and the Heartbreak Kid turned back the clock by bringing D-Generation X back to the world of wrestling. I fell for this hook, line and sinker, by the way. I had no idea what was coming. Shawn said just when you thought it was safe to put on the old Groblin show, DX are back in town. Triple H takes the mic and he goes through his "Are you ready?" routine. He finishes up and then he kicks HBK and he hits him with a thunderous pedigree. D-Generation X would not reunite on this evening. As a matter of fact, fans would have to wait another 4 years before DX got back together. But this would all lead to Shawn Michaels returning to in-ring action at SummerSlam 2002. Oh yeah, before that happened, Triple H tried to swerve everyone again by showing concern when Shawn was attacked backstage. He promised to find out who did it and make whoever did it pay dearly for their crimes. But it turned out to be Triple H himself who jumped his old friend. Fantastic.
Those eyes right there! Those eyes lost Elizabeth.
This one was so memorable because it was done in such a way that was actually pretty believable. Randy Savage's 1989 heel turn was all about Macho's own insecurities and Macho's inability to control both his jealousy and his temper. He and Hulk Hogan had created a successful tag team known as the Megapowers, and the Megapowers were insanely popular with younger audiences. They were truly a babyface dream team that featured two of the very best the WWF had to offer at the time, but the Megapowers would explode in dramatic fashion, and this would all lead to a big WrestleMania main event where it could be argued the build-up was actually better than the match itself. Randy thought that Hulk Hogan was getting a little too friendly with Miss Elizabeth, and he was picking up on a few things that Randy felt went beyond a professional relationship. The heel turn took place on the February 3rd, 1989 episode of the main event. The Megapowers wrestled Akeem and the Big Boss Man. Savage bumped into Liz, Liz got knocked out, and Hulk Hogan decided to stop the match and carry Liz away to get medical attention. The Macho Man was left all on his own to fight two men, while Hogan seemed way more interested in Miss Elizabeth. Liz told Hogan to go back and help Randy, but Randy was so angry with Hogan that he decided to slap him in the face instead and walk away from the match. Hogan, of course, defeated Akeem and the Big Boss Man single-handedly, but he hurried back to check on Miss Elizabeth. Randy was already there giving Liz a hard time, and then the Macho Man let it all out. He accused Hogan of trying to steal Miss Elizabeth away from him. He felt like he was taking a back seat in the Megapowers, and when Hogan told Liz to talk some sense into Randy, the Macho Man launched an attack and Savage turned heel. The partnership was over, the feud had begun, and as mentioned, this would culminate in a WrestleMania match that, of course, Hulk Hogan won. Many would say that Randy was justified in turning heel and it was actually Hulk Hogan who was the villain in all this. A key trait to being a good heel is that that heel has to believe that they're in the right, and by all accounts, Randy had good reason to be annoyed. But this would turn out to be another very memorable turn, and it was one of the better storylines WWF produced in the late 80s.
You think that you are better than me?
The Undertaker!
Don't you?
You don't kick ass for 3 decades without changing things up every now and then, and The Undertaker's a guy who definitely changed things up. His American Badass character, though, seems to be a little polarizing from the comments I usually get on my channel, but I liked Backer Taker quite a bit, and I thought the character fit into the programming the WWF wanted to produce at the time. 2 Taker turns spring to mind for me. The one that led to the creation of the Ministry when the Dead Man became the Lord of Darkness, and then there's the one that you guys talked about in the comments in the last heel turn video, the 2001 turn that happened on Raw towards the end of the year. Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon tried to get Jim Ross to join the illustrious Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club when Steve Austin refused to do so, and of course Jim Ross wasn't very keen. The Undertaker arrived on the scene and we all thought the American Badass was going to save Ross, but it didn't quite work out that way. Undertaker said he's seen a lot of people leave the WWF: Hogan, Savage, Warrior, Piper, Bret and Shawn. All these men kiss McMahon's ass in one way or another, but the one man who kissed McMahon's ass the most was the Undertaker himself. 11 years the Undertaker's had to put up with McMahon's crap, so Undertaker wanted to know if Jim Ross was about to kiss Vince's ass, and did Ross want to kiss McMahon's ass? Jim Ross says hell no, and Taker then wanted to know if that's because Jim Ross thinks he's better than the Undertaker. Ross then takes a punch to the face and the Undertaker had officially turned heel. Taker tells Ross he isn't better than the Dead Man before promising that he's gonna kiss Vince's rear end tonight, and Taker says it won't happen until Vince McMahon's wearing Jim Ross's cowboy hat. The deed is done, Ross gets some ass cheek on the lips, and The Undertaker once again was a bad guy in WWF. They pulled this one off well because it was unexpected, and using Jim Ross here, who the fans absolutely loved, was a genius move also.
You're not like me anymore. You're washed up. You're washed up and you're through.
You gotta keep in mind for this one that back in this era, you usually came into a territory as a heel or a babyface, and that's how you stayed. Your character was pretty much already established and deviations were very uncommon. This heel turn would really set the bar for years to come. It was the blueprint for others to follow, and it resonates with a lot of people still to this day because of how impactful it was. Bruno's student Larry Zbyszko debuted in 1973 as a babyface, and in 1974 he was voted Rookie of the Year by PWI. His career was fast-tracked thanks to his association with a living legend, but as the years went on, he always felt he was living in Bruno's shadow. He was always Bruno's kid. In late 1979, Bruno transitioned into an announcer role, but WWF business was down and a Sammartino comeback could potentially fare well if handled correctly, so a student versus teacher storyline was cooked up that would feature Zbyszko and Sammartino. Larry wouldn't answer some of Bruno's questions when Bruno was just trying to do his job as an announcer and an interviewer, and Zbyszko would eventually admit that he was getting a little fed up of being known as only Bruno's student. The only way Larry could get out of Bruno's shadow was if he beat him in the middle of the ring, and so a challenge was laid out. Bruno refused. He didn't want to hurt their friendship, but when Zbyszko said he was going to retire, Bruno relented and he agreed to have the match on one stipulation. Bruno would only wrestle defensively and he wasn't going to go into the match to hurt his friend. Well, the match did indeed take place and Larry Zbyszko absolutely destroyed Bruno with a wooden chair, leaving Sammartino a bloody and beaten up mess. Fans were absolutely livid. Chair shots weren't as common as what they are now, and viewers at home were warned during replays that the match wasn't suitable for those with a weak stomach or those who had children in the room. And all this created a lot of buzz that in turn made Larry Zbyszko the most hated man in all of pro wrestling. As the feud raged on, Bruno would say he created Frankenstein's monster, while Larry would call himself the real living legend. Said he sold out to see Sammartino get his revenge on Zbyszko, but there was never a clear winner. It all led to the famous showdown in Shea Stadium where Bruno Sammartino defeated Zbyszko by stepping out of a steel cage. Groundbreaking, trend-setting, and proving there's big business to be had when emotion gets injected into wrestling angles. Larry Zbyszko's heel turn could very well be the most important turn of all time.
I think I'm tired of my best friend stabbing me in the back.
Not many people bring this one up, but upon watching it again, it was actually pulled off really well. It makes you feel a little uncomfortable while also adding some good old shock value. At WWE Bragging Rights 2009, a Fatal 4-Way World Title match was booked featuring champion The Undertaker, CM Punk, Rey Mysterio, and Batista. Batista had the match won, but the pin was broken up by Rey Mysterio, and keep in mind, Mysterio and Batista were good friends leading up to this. Also, keep in mind though that the world title's on the line, so friendship and sportsmanship can kinda get tossed out the window until the final bell. So Rey breaking up the pin shouldn't have been that big of a deal. Undertaker ended up pinning Batista. Batista was upset, but it appeared that he and Rey patched things up after the bout during a post-match interview, and this is when things get good. Batista takes the mic, he puts his arm around Rey, and he says he's tired of getting so close to winning the belt and he's tired of his friends stabbing him in the back. Rey says it's not like that, but Batista keeps a hand on Rey's back and he asks him, "Do you think I'm playing?" There's no physicality yet, you can sense it's coming and you can sense that Mysterio's in a lot of trouble, but it's built up really slowly. Batista says he's not playing and he laughs and he smiles when he says, "I'm gonna rip your head off." And just when Batista drops the mic, his whole demeanor changes. He hits a big clothesline before kicking Rey out of the ring, and on the outside he chokes Mysterio while shouting, "You were supposed to be my friend." Rey calls Batista by his first name and he pleads for Batista to let go. He says, "Dave, you're hurting me," and for a moment we think Batista's gonna come to his senses, but he instead throws Mysterio into the barrier. Batista then goes to walk away, but he runs back and he lands a kick to Mysterio's head, and then he walks back up the ramp. I know Batista gets a lot of flack, and I also know a lot of it's unwarranted, but this, I thought, was some of his best work. Big Batista's had one of the best face turns and one of the best heel turns in pro wrestling history. On the next episode of SmackDown, Rey wanted to straighten things out and he asked Dave, what about Eddie Guerrero? What about the guy who both Rey and Batista were good friends with? And Batista solidified his heel turn by saying, "Eddie is dead. He's not thinking about Eddie, he's thinking about himself."
This time, it's the Andersons and Ric Flair. Look at Ric, what he does to Dusty. Why?
In early 1985, Flair was a tweener in core markets such as the Carolinas and Virginia, but on TBS TV, he was still a heel. The heel turn was completely solidified in all areas though on the 29th of December 1985 when Flair, the NWA champion at the time, battled Nikita Koloff inside a steel cage in the Omni Coliseum. Flair won the match, but a beatdown from Nikita and Ivan Koloff followed, and this led to Dusty Rhodes rushing down to make the save. Dusty helps the Nature Boy, but then Arn and Ole Anderson head to the ring, and fans are left shocked when Flair and the Andersons not only attack Dusty, but they absolutely destroy him. Dusty gets annihilated, and a riot almost breaks out in the Omni as fans try to climb the cage. It's the kind of feat that must have scared the crap out of the guys in the ring, because to the fans in the Omni in Atlanta, this was very real. Shortly afterwards, the Andersons would also help out Tully Blanchard in a match against Sam Houston, and the Andersons, Flair and Blanchard, along with Blanchard's manager JJ Dillon, would confirm their alliance and call themselves the Four Horsemen, one of the greatest heel stables to ever step inside the ring. Before that happened though, the attack on Dusty led to a match at Starrcade 1985 between the Nature Boy and the American Dream. Dusty managed to beat Flair for the title, but after the event, Tommy Young ruled the match as a DQ victory and the belt went back to Slick Rick.
I don't give a damn what anybody thinks of me.
I think the actual setup and the pieces that were put in place for this heel turn was what made it so good, and the execution of this one resulted in what I believe to be one of the best finishes to a WWF title match that the company ever produced. At SummerSlam 1997, Bret Hart was getting a title shot against The Undertaker, and Bret said if he lost this upcoming match then he wouldn't wrestle again in the United States. Weeks later, when Raw went to Canada, Shawn Michaels announced that he was going to referee the Bret vs Taker match, but there would be a big stipulation. If HBK interfered and helped The Undertaker in any way at all, then HBK would also not be allowed to wrestle in the United States. So the only thing Shawn could really do was call it right down the middle and hope that his arch nemesis would come up short after a fair match. The thing is though, this is Shawn Michaels, and even Jerry Lawler said on commentary at SummerSlam that somehow, some way, Shawn's going to end up being the center of attention because he just can't help himself. Bret used a chair during the match and he quickly threw it away while Shawn wasn't looking. HBK noticed the chair and he confronts the Hitman. Bret says it's got nothing to do with him and Shawn needs to back off, but HBK won't let it go and he pulls Bret back to continue their conversation. The Hitman ends up spitting on Shawn and Shawn swings the chair. Bret ducks out of the way and The Undertaker takes all the impact. HBK now had to make a decision really fast. Does he count the pin so he can continue to wrestle in the United States, or does he give it all up and refuse to count Taker's shoulders to the mat? Well, HBK decided his career was more important and he counted the pinfall. Bret became WWF champion and the fans were irate. The next night on Raw, Shawn said all this wasn't his fault. He blamed WWF and he blamed Vince McMahon. Shawn pretty much said the company and the fans should have been fully aware that putting a guy like HBK in a referee spot was only going to lead to problems. The fans were dumping this all on Shawn's lap when really it's the fans' problem for expecting less of the Heartbreak Kid. Shawn pretty much said he didn't care. If he was going to go down and take the hit for this one, he was going to drag everyone in WWF down with him, and he doesn't care what anyone thinks of him anymore. A rivalry between Taker and HBK would then develop, and this would bring about the genesis of D-Generation X. We heard stories of Shawn being a cocky asshole backstage during this time period, but now he was allowed to be that asshole on TV. This heel Shawn Michaels was much different from the old boy toy from the early 90s.
Because Hulk Hogan, I have earned respect. I deserve respect.
Roddy Piper blamed Paul Orndorff for their loss at WrestleMania 1, and Mr. Wonderful was attacked by Piper on the first ever Saturday Night's main event. Later that same evening, Orndorff ran to the ring to help Hulk Hogan when the Hulkster got double-teamed by Piper and Bob Orton. Orndorff would become a babyface who would ditch Bobby Heenan as his manager in favour of tagging up with Hulk Hogan and facing Piper and Orndorff in tag matches all across the United States. Orndorff would also compete in singles matches with Piper and Orton. Bobby Heenan would place a bounty on Mr. Wonderful's head, and fans really bought into the babyface Mr. Wonderful as he fought the good fight during 1985 and 1986. Things got a little shaky though when Hulk Hogan was too busy to take a phone call from Paul, and Paul thought this was a sign of disrespect. Adrian Adonis was also stirring the pot by calling Paul Hulk Jr. and telling Orndorff that he's nothing but Hulk Hogan's lackey. He's playing second fiddle to the real superstar of WWF. Paul wanted to prove that he was just as good as Hulk Hogan. He and Hogan battled the Moondogs, and Orndorff got the win by wrestling most of the match by himself, and then the heel turn was solidified when he and Hogan teamed up to take on Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. Hogan and Mr. Wonderful collided into each other and Paul fell off the apron. Studd and Bundy then double-teamed the Hulkster, but Paul didn't help. He was selling his eye after the collision. Eventually, though, Paul did get in the ring to help out Hogan. Fans in the arena thought everything was okay and all's well that ends well, but Orndorff then hit Hogan with a clothesline and a piledriver to solidify his place as a heel once again, and fans weren't happy at all. Bobby Heenan came back to manage Mr. Wonderful. Paul started using Real American as his own entrance theme, and Paul and Hogan would then face each other in matches all across America that would draw a lot of money. It would all culminate in matches at the big event on pay-per-view and a steel cage match at the 9th Saturday Night's Main Event show. Hogan won the big event match via disqualification, and after some bullshittery and a match restart, Hulk Hogan won the cage match at Saturday Night's Main Event. This heel turn though shook a lot of younger viewers at the time, and it also introduced a lot of younger viewers to what a heel turn was. The Orndorff vs Hogan rivalry also done big numbers for WWF. Those of you who join me for Reliving the War every week would know that this one still hits me pretty hard because I couldn't get enough of the Steiner brothers, but it was still a good heel turn. The Steiner brothers breaking up at one point seemed impossible. Brothers Rick and Scott were as thick as thieves, and they were also incredibly successful and incredibly popular. Times were changing though in 1998, and while Scott did turn heel briefly in 1998, it's the turn at Super Brawl 8 that left everybody stunned, although we also should have seen this one coming. Scott was getting a little cocky during Steiner tag team matches on Nitro. Sometimes he would completely refuse to tag his brother in and he would win matches all by himself, but Rick and manager Ted DiBiase would let Scott know that he was out of line and he needs to start being a team player. Scott would also get distracted a few times when competing in pose downs with Buff Bagwell before, during and after matches, and the commentators speculated that these little pose downs seemed to be more friendly than competitive. Anyway, it appears that the Steiner brothers were back on track after winning the WCW World Tag Team Championships on Nitro. The next stop for Rick and Scott was WCW Super Brawl 8, where the brothers would face former champions Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. During the match, while the Steiners were performing their usual pose after clearing out the ring, Scott began attacking Rick and the commentators couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some fans popped, others were stunned, but Scott had done the unthinkable by turning his back on brother Rick, and Scott would go on to pretty much hand the Outsiders the tag team championships. Scott Steiner joined the New World Order. He debuted a new look the very next night on Monday Nitro. In his early days in the faction saw him team up with a new partner, Buff Bagwell. Scott's new look and attitude would eventually elevate him to the top of the cards during WCW's darkest days, but Big Papa Pump proved to be successful, and it all started at Super Brawl 8 when the Steiner brothers broke up in the middle of the ring.
Die, Rocky, die. That's the gratitude I get from you pieces of crap.
I included Rock's heel turn at Survivor Series 98 in the previous video, but many of you thought that The Rock joining the Nation in 1997 meant a whole lot more, and indeed, on the grand scheme of things, you're absolutely right. Rock debuted in WWF during a very interesting time in the company. Fans were starting to favour the bad guys, and the white meat babyface was definitely going out of fashion. Rock made his debut at Survivor Series 1996, and on the very same night, the fans cheered for the heel Psycho Sid during his main event match with Shawn Michaels. So this gives us an example of where the company was headed, whether the WWF liked it or not. The NWO played a big part in this too over on TNT, but a guy like Rocky Maivia coming in all smiles and trying his very best to win matches and accepting losses because the better man won just wasn't gonna cut it. The WWF also pushed Rocky quite a lot in late 1996 and early 1997, and it didn't take long for people to get sick of him within the span of a few months. Even The Rock said himself that things weren't looking too good for his future, and he was at risk of becoming another guy who comes into a lot of fanfare, but then he just kinda fizzles out again. Rocky Maivia got put on the shelf when he wrestled a match against Mankind, and a bad knee injury would keep him out of action for a few months. When he came back though, he helped out Farouk, the leader of the villainous Nation of Domination, and Rock would turn heel and join the group. This one is very significant because not only did The Rock need to change things up in order to stick around WWF, but Rock was able to be himself a whole lot more as a heel. Turns out Rock's a pretty funny guy when he gets going, and over time fans would come to appreciate the Great One, but it took a heel turn for this side of The Rock to come out. After addressing the fans the next week on Raw and showing his displeasure at fans chanting "Die Rocky Die" during his matches, The Rock was able to get a lot of hate as part of the nation. Fans would chant "Rocky sucks" when the whole nation stood in the ring, and only in the world of wrestling could this be considered a good thing. Fans were paying attention to Rocky much more than the other heels in the faction, and this didn't go unnoticed. Rock would eventually take over the leadership role in the Nation of Domination while forcing Farouk out with a beatdown. Rock would then just become a bigger star after each passing week. The shock value of the 1998 Survivor Series turn was great, but when you talk about a heel turn that seriously helped a wrestler get to the next level, Rock joining the Nation ranks up there as one of the most significant.
But I got where I am today on my own. I have come into my own.
Barry Windham was always known as a great performer, but one that could never reach the next level. There's plenty of other guys like this in pro wrestling, and it's a sticking point for many fans in the modern era. There's so many talented guys and girls out there right now, but very little get a big break. Well, Barry Windham was also in that category. Everyone knew he was one of the best, but big opportunities were few and far between. That all changed when Barry Windham turned heel though, and while Barry would still play second fiddle to other bigger stars, such as Ric Flair, the heel turn did wonders for Barry's career, and the shock of Windham turning heel left a lasting impression on many NWA fans. Lex Luger was a short-lived member of the Four Horsemen. J.J. Dillon ordered Luger to eliminate himself from the Bunkhouse Stampede Battle Royal in 1988, but the total package refused. So Luger left the Elite faction and he found himself a new tag team partner in Barry Windham. The sneaky J.J. Dillon would try to recruit Barry Windham into the Four Horsemen, and this made Windham wary of Lex Luger's intentions. Barry thought this was all a plot to get him to join the faction, but the team carried on. Their tag team title win at the first Clash of the Champions is something you need to watch just to see the insane crowd reaction. This just proves how popular the team of Luger and Windham really was. Barry and Lex were booked in a tag title defense against former champions Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Luger got messed up when Tully threw him into a ring post, and this would lead to Luger not being there when Barry needed a tag. J.J. Dillon took this opportunity to further enforce that Luger was no good and Windham needed to join the Horsemen, and that's exactly what happened. Barry Windham power slammed Luger back in the ring, he let Arn Anderson pin his own partner, and Barry made it clear he was not a Horseman when he left the ring with J.J., Tully and Anderson. A lot of hearts were broken that night, but this would become a career-defining moment for Barry Windham. Windham would end up winning the US title, and he legitimately helped the Four Horsemen become even more elite. Many people think the iteration of the Horsemen that included Barry Windham was the absolute best version of the group that ever existed. The turn was unexpected. It paid off big time in terms of getting people talking and helping Barry Windham add more layers to his character. If you can legitimately piss fans off or make them really upset with a heel turn, then in my opinion, it worked. Mankind's babyface turn was pulled off in a way that the WWF or WWE would try to replicate again, but they were nowhere near as successful. Mick Foley's a wonderful storyteller, and the way he can tell a tale while demanding sympathy from the audience is absolutely unmatched. To get the Mankind character some fan support, the WWF and Mick Foley let people see that there was more behind the mask, and there was more to this disfigured character than what meets the eye. There's a human being in there. In a sit-down interview with Jim Ross that went over a few episodes of Raw, Mankind talked about his childhood, how he got teased at school, how he never envisioned himself becoming this Mankind character, and instead he envisioned himself as this heartthrob known as Dude Love. He talked about how his pain and suffering seemed to make people care about him and how death matches made people accept him. And it's all pretty deep when you think about us as people and how we see great things in our future, but things don't turn out the way we expect them to, and how we reach our goals by doing things in unexpected ways. For Mick Foley though, he had to go through extreme lengths to make people take notice of him. It all started with eating worms in school, and his journey had led him all the way to the WWF, where unfortunately fans were spitting on him and they were saying pretty mean things about Mick. Mankind may have been demented, he may have had violent tendencies, but he was also fragile and he just wanted acceptance. The interviews ended with Jim Ross taking the mandible claw, but when Foley came out to wrestle matches on Raw, fans would now cheer for him. They held up signs for Mankind and they would chant his name, and slowly Foley would get that adulation and acceptance that he had been looking for ever since he was a young kid. Soon enough, Dude Love would show up, and even Cactus Jack would make appearances on WWF television, and the babyface turn of Mankind would lead to much bigger and better things for Mrs. Foley's baby boy in the WWF. When Hulk Hogan made his WWF return in 2002, he came in as part of the New World Order. Hulk had never wore the black gear in WWF, his legacy in New York was tied up in the yellow and red gear, but the Hulkster's heel turn in WCW had helped reinvigorate his career immensely, and besides, there was a lot more value and a lot more intrigue in bringing in Hogan, Hall and Nash as the New World Order. The branding itself was worth a fortune. WWF fans though, and pro wrestling fans in general, never forget, we're a loyal breed of fans who follow careers from start to end, and we all know that Hogan's glory days in the World Wrestling Federation were deeply rooted in being the babyface of all babyfaces, the real American, say your prayers and eat your vitamins. Hulk Hogan wrestled The Rock at WrestleMania 18, and it's one of the most entertaining and fascinating WrestleMania matches you'll ever see in your life, and that's thanks to fans remembering the Hulkster. Once upon a time, the Hulkster ruled over WrestleMania. He was in main event after main event during the early days of the biggest show of the year, and fans in the Toronto Sky Dome didn't forget. The heel Hollywood Hogan was cheered from bell to bell, and credit to both Rock and Hogan here, they changed up their match accordingly, from giving the fans more time to pop for the Hulkster to small nuances that fed into the unexpected but truly awesome fan reaction that Hollywood Hogan received on this night. This is one of those things that you just can't manufacture, and it's something you couldn't bank on heading into the match. But Hogan and Rock did a wonderful job of reading the audience and adjusting their match accordingly, turning it into a memorable Mania match for the ages. Hall and Nash were upset with the handshake after the bout, and this leads to Rock and Hogan fighting off the outsiders. The Rock then gave Hogan the ring to do some celebrating with the fans, brother, and Hulk Hogan would leave the NWO to put on the old red and yellow gear once again. This one doesn't count as a full-on babyface turn because the guy in question only stayed babyface for one night, but boy did they ever pull this one off well. On the 19th of May 2003 episode of Raw, Steve Austin told Triple H he had to defend the World Heavyweight Championship. Hunter was allowed to choose who his opponent would be for this night, but whoever it was had to be a former world champion. Austin gave Triple H a few options: Kane, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho and Kevin Nash, but Austin forgot about the greatest world champion of all time, Nature Boy Ric Flair. Triple H selected his friend Ric Flair, and he fully expected Ric to lay down in the middle of the ring, but that's not what happened. Triple H told Flair that the two of them could have a night off if Ric laid down, plus it's an easy way to get back at Steve Austin. But Ric bumped into Shawn Michaels a little later on, and the Heartbreak Kid reminded Ric Flair about who he was and what he had accomplished. Flair got a little upset when he realised that someone still believed in him. He wanted to know if Michaels truly thought that the Nature Boy could really beat someone like Triple H, and Shawn says he knows the Nature Boy can do it. All Flair has to do is believe in himself. Before the match, Flair confronted Triple H and he talked about how it was Hunter who approached Ric months ago and demanded that the old Ric Flair came back. The styling and profiling Slick Rick had lost his confidence and Hunter wanted it to return. So it's time to find out if the Nature Boy is really back. He needs to test himself against the game. He's not going to lay down in North Carolina of all places, and he warns Triple H to be at his best. What we end up getting is a very emotional match where Slick Rick's the babyface for one night only, and it feels like a big deal. Jim Ross can't even sit down during the entrances. The crowd's 100% behind Ric Flair, and Slick Rick turned back the clock to do some naching with his friend in the middle of the ring. Jim Ross's commentary is excellent in this match as he really sells the fact that Ric Flair could become the World Heavyweight Champion once again when this one's all said and done. But unfortunately, Rick ends up taking the loss after Triple H hits him with a pedigree. The following week, Flair teamed up with Shawn Michaels to take on Triple H in a handicap match, and we all found out that Flair and Hunter were still tight when Flair attacked Shawn. That Triple H versus Ric Flair match, though, is really something else. Raw matches that ride on nothing but pure emotion are few and far between, so check this one out if you get a chance. It was Randy's relationship with Miss Elizabeth that made him turn heel, and it was Randy's relationship with Miss Elizabeth that would eventually turn him back to a babyface. After the Megapowers exploded, Macho would replace Liz with sensational Sherry, and another emotional moment came at WrestleMania 7 when the Macho Man faced the Ultimate Warrior in a retirement match. The loser would have to say goodbye to WWF for good, and after 20 minutes of action and after stealing the show in the LA Memorial Sports Arena, the Macho Man was defeated by the Warrior. Sherry attacked the Macho Man during his darkest moment in the WWF, and Liz couldn't sit in the crowd and watch it any longer. She ran to the ring, she fought off Sherry, and when the Macho Man embraced Miss Elizabeth, the crowd went absolutely crazy, and the Macho Man turned babyface once again. Of course, Macho didn't fully retire from in-ring competition, but the WWF created what could have been a fulfilling end to the Macho Man's WWF story if he really did retire at Mania 7. This one also gives us a great example of how popular Miss Elizabeth was, and if you maybe enjoyed the heel Macho King stuff a little more than Savage's work as a good guy, you still can't say that this babyface turn at WrestleMania 7 wasn't awesome. People were legitimately crying in the audience, and that's the kind of thing you just can't script, unless you pay for plants, of course. Not one that many people talk about, but I thought this was done pretty well, and more or less a whole episode of Primetime was dedicated to Mr. Perfect's face turn. It wasn't only Kurt Hennig who made this good though, you also have to give credit to Bobby the Brain Heenan. Perfect had aligned himself with Ric Flair as his executive consultant, and Perfect had pretty much backed up anything Flair did in 1992. Razor Ramon would also become associated with Ric Flair, and these two were scheduled to take on the Macho Man Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior at Survivor Series 1992. But just before that match could take place, the Warrior got released. The WWF obviously needed a replacement, and the WWF decided to turn Perfect against Flair, Ramon and Heenan at the very last minute. So this was a babyface turn that wasn't originally planned. On the November 16th, 1992 episode of Primetime, Bobby Heenan and Mr. Perfect laughed at the fact that Randy Savage didn't have a tag team partner anymore for this upcoming Survivor Series match. But Savage says he's actually got a replacement in mind, a guy who Savage doesn't even like, but a guy who Randy wants to take a chance with. He could be the perfect tag team partner. The guys on Primetime put two and two together, and Kurt laughs at the prospect. Heenan thinks it's funny when Macho Man says the company Perfect hangs around with are holding him back, and for a moment you can see Mr. Perfect actually considering Macho's offer. Randy would play it up by saying Perfect needs to take this gut check and think for himself, but the initial offer gets laughed off and Primetime continues. Mr. Perfect then gets a phone call, and Bobby Heenan wants to know who's calling in. Whoever it is, they've got Perfect's attention. Bobby makes a few mistakes next when he highlights Hennig's abilities as a broadcaster instead of his abilities as a great pro wrestler, and then Razor Ramon and Ric Flair join the broadcast and they make things even worse. Flair says Rick does the wrestling while Flair does the consulting. They're a great team as they are, but again, you can see that Perfect isn't too enamored with what he's hearing. Bobby thinks it was Flair who called Perfect earlier on in the show, but Rick says it wasn't the Nature Boy, so it had to be Macho. The other guys on Primetime then point out that Heenan's calling the shots here and Perfect isn't allowed to make his own decisions. Perfect has to keep defending himself, and it's clear he's getting fed up with the lack of respect he's receiving from the guys that he thought were his friends. Heenan says there's no reason for Kurt to get in the ring, and long story short, Perfect gets fed up again and he tells Macho he's going to consider the offer. Heenan loses it. Flair and Ramon can't believe what they're hearing, and it all boils over when Heenan tells Perfect he has to stay in Flair's shadow, and Perfect has to remember that Bobby Heenan signs the checks. Perfect then accepts Randy Savage's offer. Heenan ends up slapping him across the face, and when Perfect grabs Heenan by the tie, the Brain instantly shows regret and he gets on his knees to beg for forgiveness. Perfect pours a pitcher of water over Heenan's head while calling him a wet weasel, and Perfect would go on to tag up with Macho at the 1992 Survivor Series. It's great because it spanned across a whole episode of prime time, and it's great too because it's another example of WWF turning a negative into a positive. If Warrior hadn't gotten himself fired, then we never would have seen this highly entertaining face turn. This one was a slow build, but it's a fine example of how to do the slow build properly. The payoff was excellent and it created a new WrestleMania main eventer. Batista was part of Evolution and the group had been having some issues. Randy Orton was kicked out after he won the world title. That was a title that Triple H felt belonged to the game and only the game. And then Triple H would start taking advantage of Dave Batista while also thinking the Animal had no idea what was going on. Batista knew what Triple H was up to, but he decided to play the game for a little longer and lure Triple H in with a false sense of security. At the 2005 New Year's Revolution Elimination Chamber match, Triple H had the opportunity to save Batista from getting eliminated, but he let him get pinned instead. Afterwards, Triple H wanted Dave to give up his spot in the Royal Rumble match and instead look out for Triple H in his world title match against Randy Orton, but Dave wasn't having none of it and the big man ended up winning the Royal Rumble match. Batista had a choice to make. He could head over to SmackDown and challenge JBL for the WWE Championship, or he could stay on Raw and face the game for the World Heavyweight Championship. On the night where Batista was scheduled to make his decision, he overheard Triple H and Ric Flair talking a little shit about the Animal, and this just solidified Dave's decision. He went to the ring and he swerved Triple H into thinking he was going to go to SmackDown. When Batista's thumbs up turned to a thumbs down, the crowd went crazy, and just like that, WWE had a new top babyface. Triple H gets put through a table, Evolution's finally ended, and Batista would go on to WrestleMania 21 to win the World Heavyweight Championship. This one ties into Macho Man's face turn too. Undertaker and Jake Roberts were all buddy-buddy, and these two would make Liz and Macho's wedding reception a living nightmare when they gave Liz a snake as a wedding gift. The Undertaker also knocked Macho Man out with the urn, so these two didn't mind stooping pretty low to get one over on their opponents. On the February 15th, 1992 episode of Superstars though, The Undertaker had a change of heart and he would actually assist Liz and Macho when Jake Roberts planned an attack. Macho and Liz were coming back through the curtain, but Jake was waiting with a steel chair. Jake said he didn't care if he hit Macho or Liz, just as long as he hit one of them. The two walked through the curtain, Roberts goes to swing the chair, but The Undertaker stops him, and this allows Randy to take out Jake. This is pretty significant because it would begin a very successful babyface run for The Undertaker, and he wouldn't turn heel again until late 1998. The Dead Man would become one of WWF's most popular characters, and today he's considered an absolute legend of the company. And this moment here was when fans were able to cheer for The Undertaker as he went on his first babyface run. Undertaker stopping Jake led to the two having a match at WrestleMania 8. There's a story about how that match played out, but Taker was able to win his second WrestleMania match here, and we all know how Taker would fare in the WrestleMania events that followed. DDP's face turn in WCW wasn't something that just happened after one show, although there was a moment that solidified where he stood. Before the NWO came along and during the first few months of the faction's existence, Dallas was involved in rivalries that centered around the Diamond Doll Kimberly. At World War III 1995, Paige was defeated by Johnny B. Bad and Kimberly was supposed to become Johnny's full-time manager. And when Johnny left to join WWF, Kimberly made quite the decision when she sided with the Booty Man, becoming the Booty Babe and leaving Dallas looking like a chump. Page went on to Slamboree 1996 where he won the Battle Bowl ring and he got tied up in feuds with Eddie Guerrero and Jim Duggan. But then Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came over with a ton of hype behind them, and Page got the opportunity to do something with the Outsiders that would make him one of WCW's biggest fan favourites. Page had history with Hall and Nash, and the Outsiders were more than happy to give Dallas a moment on Nitro that would steer DDP's career in a new direction. The Outsiders tried to recruit DDP week after week and Dallas wouldn't give a straight answer. But on the 13th of January 1997 episode of Nitro, DDP would finally let the Outsiders and the fans know his decision. DDP put an NWO shirt on, everyone thought Page had joined up with the boys, but then Dallas drops Scott Hall with a diamond cutter and he sends Big Kev to the outside of the ring. The place absolutely erupted when this went down, and from this moment, Dallas was a made man in WCW after being there for so many years. This was another slow build, and it did seem like DDP was on a babyface path in the run-up to this moment, but the turn was given a ton of impact when Dallas pulled off the cutter, and from this point on, the only way was up for Diamond Dallas Page. I thought Razor Ramon's babyface turn was handled quite well, and it's another case of WWF creating a very popular babyface from a guy who had also worked very well as a heel. It's been said that the decision to turn Razor happened after his WrestleMania 9 match with Bob Backlund. This was one of those early examples of the fans cheering for the villain while more or less dismissing the babyface, but you can't really blame fans here either. Backlund just didn't appeal to fans of this era as a good guy, and the audience got behind Razor, who was just a million times cooler than what Bob could ever hope to be. The Lightning Kid, or the Kamikaze Kid, Cannonball Kid, or 1-2-3 Kid, whatever you want, came into WWF shortly after Mania 9 and he was booked as a job guy. On an episode of Raw though, the Kid got a major upset win over the villainous Razor Ramon and Razor couldn't believe it. A guy like the 1-2-3 Kid shouldn't be getting wins over someone like Razor Ramon. This played out really well due to the nature of WWF programming at the time. Squash matches were frequent and fans would fully expect these matches to play out as intended. The big star defeats the random newcomer and then you wonder if that newcomer would ever be seen again. This time though, the job guy beat the big star, and in doing so, the job guy became part of regular WWF programming. Let it be known though that Sean Waltman had quite a lot of experience away from WWF at this point. His matches against Jerry Lynn in Minneapolis, Dallas, and even Japan are still very much worth checking out today. But casual WWF fans didn't know anything about this, of course, and the Kid was presented as a young wrestler who really didn't have a hope in hell of beating Razor Ramon. After the big victory, Razor would try to entice Kid back into the ring for another match, even putting up a hefty sum of money to make the match happen. Kid would end up stealing the money, and this would lead to Money Incorporated mocking the bad guy. Ted DiBiase and IRS made fun of Razor, and it was through Money Inc. that Razor turned babyface. When the bad guy attacked these two, the fans erupted, and Razor would end up becoming very good friends with the 1-2-3 Kid, both on screen and off screen. The face turn was very effective, and as mentioned, Razor Ramon would become one of WWF's most popular superstars throughout the New Generation era. This is a bit of an odd one because Stone Cold did not change his character after the WWF started putting him against heels, but it shows us how insanely popular Stone Cold could be just by being himself. We all point to WrestleMania 13 and the big submission match as the turning point for Stone Cold, and indeed it was. It was here where the WWF gave fans a reason to cheer for Stone Cold after he wouldn't give up and he left the arena on his own accord. But that path was already laid out for Stone Cold in the weeks leading up to WrestleMania. Bret was gonna turn heel. If you listen to Bret's promos and if you listen to how Vince McMahon would steer the public's perception of both men in the run up to WrestleMania on commentary, then you could take a well-educated guess that Stone Cold was going to get a big push and Bret was going to turn to the dark side. WrestleMania 13 though was the big night when the roles got reversed and the WWF embraced that grey area where not everything needs to be so cut and dry. Fans that cheered for Bret during the entrances booed him on his way out, and those same fans cheered when Austin refused help after the bout and he walked back to the locker room all on his own. Austin did not change on this evening, and he didn't change for the months and even years that followed WrestleMania 13. It didn't matter to Stone Cold if you were a good guy or a bad guy, you'd take a stunner either way. But Austin was put against company heels, and he did show more of his personality once the double turn at WrestleMania happened, and there's absolutely no point in talking about how successful he would become because you guys know the story inside out. This is a great one to discuss though because of how organic it all was, and it's also worth studying because Austin didn't turn into a good guy in the conventional manner. One of the great things about Stone Cold was how raw and how real he was, and the fans getting behind Stone Cold in 1997 and beyond was also very, very real.
You told me I was going to go out and retrieve stolen property. You didn't say nothing about no payoff.
Ray Triller's Big Boss Man gimmick was inspired by his previous career as a corrections officer. Boss Man wasn't a nice WWF corrections officer though. He would lay down the law by cuffing his fallen victims to the ring ropes and beating them with his nightstick. Boss Man played the villain for just under 2 years, but then he got the opportunity to turn babyface when Ted DiBiase paid Slick, the Boss Man's manager, to retrieve the stolen $1 Million Championship from Jake Roberts. On the February 24th, 1990 episode of Superstars on the Brother Love Show, the Boss Man got hold of a bag that had both the $1 Million Championship and Jake's pet snake Damien inside. And instead of accepting DiBiase's money for the bag, the Boss Man handed Damien and the championship back to Jake Roberts. Instantly, the fans accepted Boss Man as a good guy. He would defeat his old tag team partner Akeem at WrestleMania 6. He got on well with old rival Hulk Hogan, and he stopped handcuffing guys to the ring ropes because, well, that's a little excessive for a corrections officer, right? Surely a real corrections officer wouldn't do such a Actually, no, scrap that. Boss Man was pretty successful as a babyface, but when he returned to WWF years later, he was put straight back in a villainous role when he became Vince McMahon's own personal security guard.
Well, last week I come back to America and I hear about Magnum TA.
A wonderful babyface turn here that worked because everyone involved was super over and the territory itself was white hot. Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA were scheduled to face Tully Blanchard and Ole Anderson in a cage match, but things took a real bad turn, to put it lightly, when Magnum TA was involved in a car crash that ended his career. Magnum, of course, couldn't compete in the match, so Dusty would need to get himself a replacement. Dusty Rhodes would attack Tully Blanchard and Tully ended up with a knee injury, so he too had to get replaced. And because Arn Anderson and Ric Flair were already booked on the show, JJ Dillon had to step in to replace Tully. So even though Tully's out and JJ's in, the Horsemen think the cage match is going to be a walk in the park. On October 24th, the night of the cage match, Dusty walks out with an unlikely ally. It's Nikita Koloff. Nikita portrayed a villain from the USSR when political tensions were high, but towards the end of the 80s, the era of the Russian villain was coming to an end, thanks to US and USSR relations easing to a certain degree. So Dusty took the opportunity to turn Nikita into a good guy. You still had a feeling that Nikita was going to turn on Dusty. He has this look on his face as he steps into the cage where you can tell he's still making a decision in his mind. But my god, the crowd reaction when Nikita begins attacking Ole Anderson is nothing short of amazing. Dusty and Nikita win the match. Flair and Tully's reactions on the outside are absolutely priceless. And the turn was solidified on the TBS World Championship Wrestling show when Nikita announced that he had a lot of respect for Magnum TA.
Just in case you've forgotten, let me tell you just to know who the hell I am.
People enjoyed this one because of the unexpected hero's welcome Triple H received when he returned from a quad injury in early 2002. Hunter's injury occurred during a tag team match where he and Steve Austin took on Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit. The game finished the match while clearly in a lot of pain, but afterwards he was going to need surgery and a lot of rehab. 8 months is a long time in the world of pro wrestling, and there was really no way to tell how the crowd would react when Hunter came back. He was one of the company's top villains for years prior to this return, so nothing was guaranteed when the game came back to Raw. On the 7th of January 2002, Triple H returned to Madison Square Garden and he received an incredible ovation from the audience, pretty much making him a babyface the moment he stepped out into the arena. You'll be hard-pressed to find a sustained pop longer than this one, and Triple H being all fired up during his entrance just adds to the moment. The thing is, Triple H said he didn't know how to act as a babyface. While DX had a babyface run with Hunter leading the group, it was still juvenile promos and antics that got them over. Here, in the Garden, Hunter had to be a little more traditional in terms of what he said as a good guy, and he admitted to feeling very uncomfortable during this promo. Still, it's a great moment and it's a great turn, but I echo Triple H's sentiments about his character. I prefer Triple H as a bad guy.
I guess you could say that
It's quite a poignant babyface turn, this one, because it was also Andre's final WWF television appearance, meaning he left the big time with his head held high as a pro wrestling hero. We all know how Andre became associated with Bobby Heenan, and if not, check out my heel turn video. But through this relationship with Heenan, Andre also formed a tag team with Haku, another member of the Heenan family. Known as the Colossal Connection, this tag team was put together to make wrestling a little easier on Andre's body, and to also fill the void that the Brainbusters left when they returned to the NWA. At WrestleMania 6, the Colossal Connection were defeated by Demolition, and they also lost the WWF Tag Team Championships. Bobby Heenan began screaming at Andre, and Andre got blamed for the big loss. Heenan then slapped Andre across the face, and Andre lost it. The big man grabbed Bobby and he knocked him out of the ring, and Haku was also taken care of by the 8th wonder of the world. The fans in the Toronto Sky Dome loved it, and in hindsight, it gave us a bit of closure on Andre's WWF run. Deep down, the Giant still knew right from wrong. This face turn was kinda done in two parts, but let me explain. The Shield worked for the Authority. Ambrose, Rollins and Reigns were enforcers for Triple H from around August 2013, but the trio were also pretty popular since debuting the year prior. On the March 17th, 2014 episode of Raw, Corporate Kane said Jerry Lawler was instrumental in Daniel Bryan holding Raw hostage the week prior in Memphis with his whole Occupy Raw thing. So Kane told Jerry Lawler to get in the ring to receive his punishment. The Shield appeared and they too told the King to get inside the ropes, and the Shield escorted Jerry into the ring where Kane was waiting to take action. Kane wanted to know if Lawler had any last words, but Seth Rollins grabbed the mic and he said Daniel Bryan won't be coming down to help Jerry. The Shield, however, always do what's best for business. Rollins, Ambrose and Reigns then turn around and they face Corporate Kane. The crowd pops and a yes chant breaks out. Kane tells the Shield to stand down, but instead he takes a beating from all three men, and the crowd absolutely loved it. This all led to a 6-man tag match at WrestleMania 30. Kane and New Authority members, the New Age Outlaws, versus Rollins, Reigns and Ambrose. But even after this match, the Shield were still loosely associated with the Authority, and they were still being summoned to meetings by Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. On the April 7th episode of Raw though, that all changed when the Shield stood face to face with Evolution and Kane. Triple H said he didn't want this to break down into an all-out war, but the Shield cemented their new roles as company babyfaces when they began fighting with the Authority. Fans had wanted to cheer for the Shield for a very long time, and now there was nothing holding them back.
Look at the look on him! A standing ovation here for Virgil!
Virgil was used as a personal bodyguard for the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, but along with being a bodyguard, he was also treated like Ted's personal servant. Virgil had no issues going along with it, but a slow turn began to form when DiBiase started treating Virgil with less and less respect as the weeks and months went on. Virgil wasn't happy with his employer. He realised he was being treated very poorly, and it all came to a head at the 1991 Royal Rumble. DiBiase and Virgil defeated Dusty and Dustin Rhodes, and after the match, DiBiase ordered Virgil to put the $1 Million belt around his waist. Virgil hesitates for a moment, and then he smacks DiBiase over the head with DiBiase's prized possession. Now, if you so much as mention Virgil or Vincent nowadays, it's usually met with a smirk or a little laugh, but fans at the 1991 Royal Rumble went absolutely insane when Virgil turned on DiBiase, and you'd legitimately think the WWF had just gotten themselves their next big single star. Seriously, the reaction was absolute money. Virgil would get put with Roddy Piper to help fast track his rise in popularity. He would be a constant thorn in DiBiase's side during matches that didn't involve Virgil at all. And then, at SummerSlam 91, Virgil got another great reaction when he defeated DiBiase for the $1 Million belt in Madison Square Garden. Reportedly though, his mic work and overall lack of charisma didn't impress Vince McMahon very much, and he was pushed down the cards throughout 1992. But for a brief moment, it looked like the sky was the limit for Michael Jones.
All I can say, Gorilla, is we've definitely had a major falling out happen here tonight.
While seen early on as another ripoff of the incredibly popular Road Warriors, Demolition were able to carve out their own legacy by becoming very successful during the early days of their careers. At WrestleMania 4, they defeated Strikeforce to become WWF Tag Team Champions for the first time, but they also got a little help from their manager, Mr. Fuji. Fuji was very instrumental in the early success of Demolition, but he was also instrumental in turning Axe and Smash into good guys. At Survivor Series 89, a 10-man tag team Survivor Series match took place. The two teams featured babyfaces and heels. On the heel side, we had Demolition. On the babyface side, we had the Powers of Pain. Demolition were taking care of the Warlord when Mr. Fuji opened the ropes and Smash fell out of the ring, causing Demolition to get counted out and eliminated from the Survivor Series match. Mr. Fuji denied any wrongdoing when approached by Axe, but when Axe turned his back, Mr. Fuji hit him with his cane. Smash saw it all go down, and Smash threw Fuji into Axe, allowing Axe to body slam his former manager and giving the fans a reason to cheer for Demolition. Immediately afterwards, the Powers of Pain, who were previously babyfaces, helped Mr. Fuji, and Mr. Fuji would then help Warlord and Barbarian win the Survivor Series match. So what we ended up with here was a double turn where Demolition turned babyface and the Powers of Pain turned heel. After the match, Fuji said he was responsible for Demolition. Fuji made them champions. Demolition thought they knew more than Mr. Fuji, but now the Powers of Pain are going to destroy Axe and Smash. Demolition became very popular following Survivor Series 98, but you gotta give Mr. Fuji a lot of credit for this one too.
Fans couldn't believe their eyes as they said, no, could it be? It was Lex Luger!
The WWF was going through another post-Hulk Hogan era by the summer of 1993. Hulk came back for Mania 9, he dropped the belt to Yokozuna, the King of the Ring, and Vince McMahon seemed eager to find a new star that would replace Hulk Hogan as the company's resident All-American do-gooder. In Vince's eyes, Lex Luger fit the bill, and it appeared that McMahon only made this decision based on Lex's look and size. But do keep in mind too that Lex was still pretty experienced by 1993, plus his babyface turn in the NWA back in 87 went over really well too. The way the WWF went about turning the narcissist Lex Luger into a good guy was definitely done very well though. I love the overall presentation of this one and the concept was good too. On the USS Intrepid, the WWF held a body slam challenge, and to win this body slam challenge, all you had to do was slam WWF champion Yokozuna. The Steiner brothers failed, Tatanka, Randy Savage and Crush all failed. Pro footballers and basketball players couldn't get the job done, but here comes a helicopter with someone inside hoping to do the honours and body slam Yokozuna in front of around 1,000 fans in the blazing hot sun. Lex Luger walks out and he's wearing a Stars and Stripes shirt. The fans are already cheering for Lex as he steps inside the ring, but they go crazy when he pulls off the body slam. Fans were overjoyed when Yokozuna got slammed and Lex's babyface turn had been completed, and we all know that Luger failed to connect with the audience as time went on, but that body slam on the Intrepid is still a memorable moment in WWF history. Lex Luger could now be your hero, but only if you want Lex to be your hero, and you probably don't.
Daniel Bryan shedding the lion skin! Yes! Yes!
I don't really count this one as a full-blown babyface turn because we all knew that this was eventually going to happen and it didn't really feel like Daniel turned heel in the first place. But I'm including it here because a few of you guys mentioned it in the comments, and also it's one of the best moments of Daniel's whole WWE run in my opinion. I'm not kidding and I'm not saying this as a figure of speech, but I legitimately got goosebumps when watching this happen on Raw. No lies, this is actually one of those moments that I felt. Daniel had been getting run down pretty hard by the Authority. Triple H and Stephanie had been making Daniel's life a misery, and on top of that, Daniel was also dealing with Bray Wyatt and the Wyatt family. Eventually, Daniel realised that no matter how much the fans cheered for him, it was never going to lead to him getting a big break against the Machine. So Daniel caved in and he joined the Wyatt family. For a few weeks, Bryan was known as Daniel Wyatt and he would follow Bray's lead, but deep down, we all knew this wasn't going to last. On the January 13th, 2014 episode of Raw, Bray and Daniel were scheduled to face the Usos inside a steel cage, and it was on this night where Daniel decided to leave the Wyatt family. As short-lived as it was, the payoff was like something that had been building up for over a year. When Bryan attacked Bray, the crowd lost it, but when he stood in the corner to begin a slow yes chant, the reaction was absolutely incredible. Bray takes a running knee, Daniel climbs the cage, and while I agree the WWE's production team deserves all the flack they get for their bad camera work and camera cuts, they done an absolute stellar job here of capturing the atmosphere in the arena. The camera sweeping around the ring and the audience to show everyone chanting yes along with Daniel was absolute perfection, and it just further solidified Daniel as the man in WWE during this era. I don't consider it a full-blown face turn. Daniel was still babyface in my opinion during his brief association with the Wyatts, but seeing as quite a few of you guys brought this up and seeing as I remembered it so well, I thought it was worth mentioning in this video.
I got here because of the Heartbreak Kid. I don't need a bodyguard. I'm just a sexy boy.
Again, this is one I don't necessarily agree with because I think there's been a lot better babyface turns, but I'm not just going to pick out comments that I agree with. You guys liked it when HBK turned babyface in 1995 after WrestleMania 11, and while the turn itself would have big consequences in terms of the WWF main event scene in 1996, it was a turn that wasn't originally supposed to happen. When Shawn wrestled Diesel at WrestleMania 11, Vince McMahon wanted a strong kickout from Diesel after the champ got hit with Sweet Chin music. Diesel and Shawn protested it, saying the fans are going to hate it when Big Daddy Cool kicks out of HBK's finish like it was nothing, and Shawn elaborated on this when he wrote in his book. We told Vince that we thought the people weren't going to like it, but Vince wanted it, so that was what we did. When the time came for the kick, I hit Kevin with it and he popped up at 1. The boos came raining down. I knew it, Kevin grumbled. The next day we had a television taping in Poughkeepsie. When I arrived at the building, Vince told me he wanted to talk. Shawn, we're going to switch you babyface. What? It's because of the kick out, isn't it? It was a bad call on my part, I admit it. Why is it affecting me? I'm the only heel that you have, Shawn said. They like you, the people like you, Shawn. They like me, but they like to hate me. Now is not the time. You make the mistake and it costs me my career. I was not happy. We're going to have Sid drop you, injure you tonight, and you'll go home for 6 weeks. I was so frustrated, so bummed. We had told him that the people were gonna boo. Vince, I said, I would never tell you how to run your business, but please leave the wrestling to me. Then I went and told Kevin what was happening. They're taking me off for 6 weeks. What for? They're turning me babyface. It's because of the kickout, isn't it? The night after WrestleMania 11, Shawn told his bodyguard Sid to take the night off, and Sid wasn't prepared to do so. So Big Sid dropped Shawn with a powerbomb and Diesel ran down for the save. Shawn was taken off TV for a while, and when he came back to wrestle King Kong Bundy in a King of the Ring qualifying match on Raw, the fans were very much in his corner. The babyface turn worked out very well for Shawn as fans began to gravitate towards his flamboyance rather than hate the guy for his cockiness. Like Triple H though, I always enjoyed watching Shawn play a heel role in WWF, but he put on some absolutely incredible matches too during his time as a babyface.
The Rock still walked out of Backlash, the damn people's champ.
In the past 2 heel videos I put together, The Rock got featured in both uploads. I talked about Rock joining the nation and joining the corporation, but you guys also enjoyed seeing Rock finally turn into a fully fledged babyface when he said goodbye to Team Corporate the night after Backlash 1999. At WrestleMania 15, The Rock represented the corporation as WWF champion. He was always a proud member of the faction, and in Vince's words, he was the crown jewel of Team Corporate. Rock lost the WWF championship to Steve Austin at Mania 15, and Vince McMahon would have his hands full trying to protect his daughter from The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness. But Rock still remained part of the corporation, and he had another opportunity to win the WWF title at Backlash. Shane McMahon, who had taken over the corporation from Vince, refereed the Austin vs. Rock rematch, and it was partly because of Shane that Rock lost the bout, but that didn't stop Shane from berating The Rock the next night on Raw. Rock, of course, wasn't having it. So when The Rock spoke back to Shane in a way that only The Rock could, old Shane ordered the corporation to attack the former champ. Rock was out of the corporation for good, and he wouldn't get involved with the corporate ministry either, although he would fight members of that faction over the next couple of months. It's an important face turn though, because there was no swerve this time around. Rock would go on to become an absolute megastar within WWF, and his popularity was only matched and maybe surpassed by Stone Cold Steve Austin at this time. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and if you left a comment on the previous video, then I hope the superstar of your choice was selected for this upload. We have now looked at quite a lot of turns, and I'd be happy enough to close this off by saying we've looked at some of the absolute best babyface turns in pro wrestling history, but there's still more that I haven't talked about, and there's gonna be more as time goes on. So we'll do this again someday, but it won't be for a very long time. I'd like to cover more recent turns in the next upload, like Wardlow's turn in AEW for example, but again, it won't be for quite some time. Again, I hope you enjoyed this one though. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.